Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Smart Bridge podcast, Transform IT. I'm Zach, the Transform IT podcast producer, and your host for this episode, this unique episode. Co-hosting alongside me today is Smart Bridge Marketing Director Brooke Brown, who actually joined us in episode 16, season 2 of last year. So today we're excited to remotely host Tyler Colby, who is a data infrastructure director at Natural Resources Defense Council, or the NRDC for short. Currently, he is spearheading a Salesforce community COVID-19 sprint, which has already attracted a lot of buzz and attention during the global COVID-19 crisis. So given that, Tyler, why don't you kick us off by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit more about the charge that you are leading here.
Very excited to be here. So a little bit about myself. I started working with Salesforce in a very typical, Salesforce journey about 15 years ago. As an accidental admin, you'll hear that thrown out all across the Salesforce ecosystem, the accidental admin phenomenon. Really, I had a manager at the time who said, computers, can you help us set up Salesforce? And that's how my journey began. Along the way, I found that if we turned the power of Salesforce to nonprofits and start to look at their programs, systematize their programs, and put that into Salesforce, we could have the same type of growth that I had seen on the for-profit side, and that easy expansion, that easy customization, and we could transform nonprofit institutions. So I spent a good bulk of my career doing a lot of independent consulting, a lot of pro bono consulting on the side. At one point, I was supporting 10 organizations by myself, just doing pro bono consulting. And, if they needed Salesforce assistance, or even things like, standing up Google, or, for their whole organization, or putting a website together. So spent a lot of time working with a number of different nonprofits. About 3-4 years ago, I started working with a group called Cloud for Good, which is one of the largest nonprofit Salesforce consultancies in the United States, and a fantastic organization. And when I was there, I got to touch a number of different nonprofits. Specifically, got to work with. I know we were talking about the Houston area in our preparation for this call. Got to work with the Houston Food Bank right after Hurricane Harvey. I got to work with the Food Bank of New York City right after Hurricane Sandy. And in each of those instances, it was, shocking to me to see what technology allowed as far as a transformation of their business, and allowing these organizations to scale and scale quickly to meet the demands of an emergency and a crisis situation. So in Houston's food bank's instance, for example, we were able to go from really a centralized model where they were shipping out of a single warehouse into remote distribution centers. It allowed them to go 5x on their production because they needed to fill that increased demand during that time. And it was me and just a couple other consultants that were leading that charge. Now, that was done over a few months at that time, and it was a very large implementation. But that kind of thinking, and I've seen that thinking all the way from, larger organizations like the Houston Food Bank that are putting out, millions of pounds of food per year. But I've seen that all the way down to single, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-person nonprofits, where a little bit of technology help can really come in and make a big difference. And we'll touch into kind of the initiative that we're leading into, but that was a lot of the thinking that went into making a rallying cry for the community. So bringing people in and, saying that message, like saying, hey, technologists, Salesforce professionals, turn your eye from, this for-profit work, and in your nights and weekends, look to your local community. Turn that focus around and see, where can we help? We've asked a lot of different segments of our population during this crisis to really step up. And I'm saying, hey, technologists, we're not alone. So let's turn that focus around.
Right. And, you had mentioned now and in our previous call how COVID-19 and the global crisis that it's causing right now, it's definitely not the first time that you have led a charge in the technology space. How have you, based on your experience, how have you seen technology and innovation and the power of consultants forward thinking? How have you seen that come through and be a silver lining, more or less, in the midst of a crisis? And where do you see that going right now with COVID-19?
Very good questions. So in my past, I mentioned the Houston Food Bank, and I think that that's such a very typical example of what we see um, in the nonprofit space on so many levels, where an organization is hit by a crisis. In this case, an unprecedented crisis. I think they were calling Hurricane Harvey the literal perfect storm. People that followed that hurricane know that it really just parked right on top of Houston and was just a devastating force, and just thousands and thousands of people that were just immediately in need of additional food and the additional assistance that the Houston Food Bank provided. So really, we had to build the plane while it wasn't only flying, it was flying at, light speed. It was all hands on deck. And a lot of times, even doing the business analysis to just make sure we understood what initiative are you trying to do so that we can systematize it, was an emergency meeting wrangled in between, trying to get a whole new shipment loaded or unloaded. So it's just all hands on deck, and it was not the right way to do this. And even as we look to COVID-19 and the response that we're looking to build, and the response that we're looking to, we will inevitably be looking at building the plane as it's flying. We're already at that point as we record today. We're nearing the end of April, or excuse me, nearing April here, nearing the end of March. Um, you know, we've already seen large impacts. We've already seen spikes in demand for these community facing organizations. So a lot of it will be coming in and saying, what help do you need today? Is there help that I can provide? And that's going to run the scale. So it's going to be, some small organizations, sometimes just standing up an e-commerce website for a community food bank. I know my parents have spent most of their lives volunteering at a small church food bank. They're able to, if we're able to come in with a simple e-commerce front end, put a few options in there. So, hey, I need new bread this week. I need these specific supplies. They would be able to fulfill those orders for the elderly population that they serve so that they would never have to come in. It wouldn't need to be a full featured e-commerce website. It would just need to have some standard options. So we may not even need to do like inventory tracking and things like that. It could just be a few simple options with a free card at the end, allow people to self-service, and then people could deliver to their home. If we scale that up, there's a lot of other options that would happen too. I know looking at my local area, I'm based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I've already started to talk with the food banks around because that is an area of passion, and it's an area that I've worked in before. So I'm somewhat familiar with what the needs are with food banks. But you know, as we look at medium to large food banks, their needs are completely different. So if we look at a Salesforce product, it may be something like a community portal, so people can start to have a discussion and have that one-to-one connection with the constituents that they serve. So they can talk directly with the people at the food bank, get those orders fulfilled, and see what is the need within the community. What aren't we stocking currently? What's running short? What can we, get out to people today? What's an urgent need? That's going to be more customized, and it's going to take more professionals. So as we talk about, rallying troops into it, that's what we've been really trying to build, is a community of deep Salesforce experts that can come in and tackle those more meaty challenges. And I'm really excited that next Tuesday, so as we record next Tuesday, which is March 31st, I believe, looking at my calendar, yes, March 31st, there is going to be the first virtual sprint held by the Salesforce.org team. We're going to try it. Yeah. And these virtual sprints so the community sprints are fantastic, but this will be the first virtual one. And it'll be a bunch of people coming in to tackle very deep challenges. I'll be within that group and leading the food bank initiative. So really getting a team together to say, how do we do business analysis when they're already running at 1,000,000 miles an hour? What business analysis do we need to do? Who do we need to measure? And what can we draw off of that so that in subsequent sprints, we can start to tackle some of those issues? So again, it runs the range. And I don't want people to anchor on, really the hard issues. I want people to think, what's the scale of issues that I can solve with the toolkits that I've been developing over my technology career? So again, whether that's an e-commerce front end, whether it's taking an afternoon to sit down with the business and talk them through how to use Zoom and set that up for their business and allow business continuity. There's a lot of tools that we just take for granted because we use them on a daily basis that can absolutely transform, medium size, large size, but even those small size nonprofits. And those are going to be the ones most hit by this crisis.
Right. So what have you seen so far in the, I believe it was, I want to say March the 14th or March the 15th, whenever you initially called the COVID-19 sprint. What have you seen so far from the Salesforce community? What have you seen? What kind of reactions have you seen? What kind of progress? What kind of successes have you seen come out of that so far?
Great question. And it's been all over the place. So there's, as when we talk reactions, if we think back to March 15th already, the world was already just such a different place. I don't think we had a single stay-at-home order in the United States. I think we're still in just the 4-digit counts of people that were, tested positive. We were seeing, very little shut down, and there's a lot of still just skepticism about it. So, when it first started, the first night that it went up, only 2 of my closest contacts joined. And it was really right over that weekend when a lot of the news started to break throughout the United States. So we went from 3 people total at the end of the first day. I think we're at 26 the next day, so it started to pick up. And then by the end of that first week, we were well over 200. So I think we're still hovering right around that 200 mark, which is where we'd kind of like to keep this core inner group as we stand up our services, get things like case intake finished, and make sure that they're routed to the correct individuals. So right now we're working on a skill-based assessment so that we can make sure to route these cases to appropriate teams. Again, we want to make sure that, even though we do need to build the plane while it's flying, we need to make sure that it's being built by people that can actually build it. So matching people with enterprise level skills to the enterprise organizations, if there are projects that we can take on in this meantime. I want to say as well, we don't want to undercut or take away work from the number of consultancies that are focused on this already. So there's, I mentioned my previous experience before when I was a consultant at a nonprofit focused agency. We don't want them to take a large hit as well because the work they do is important. And those are fantastic individuals that, are going to still need organizations coming in. So we're trying to walk that fine line of, is there something that's an immediate impact that this community can take, can do a professional job and deploy that at, no charge to these nonprofits? Or is this something that's best served as a longer term project, and we can put out to those consultancies as well. So there's a couple things that we're just working out on the organizational side as we get stood up. But again, we do have that first sprint being hosted by the Salesforce nonprofit team at salesforce.org.
Okay, and actually to that, Tyler, so exactly the point of, you don't want to, you're not asking for someone to build a mountain overnight and do their full-time job. But considering the circumstances we're in, so backing up a little bit, SmartBridge, is a Salesforce partner, and we provide support and maintenance and managed services to the enterprise scale businesses of the world. And as companies are executing these stopgap procedures, such as furloughing or reductions in force, what would be your expectation for consultancies such as ours that do have those people on staff that may have some newfound freedom on their, free time on their hands, and need to still stay in the game so that when they can bounce back, or they'll have something I imagine that this could be something amazing to add on the resume that would look so appealing, because more and more the hours go by, the days go by. There's more people probably listening to this podcast right now that just got furloughed or laid off. So I also see this as a personal, accomplishment that you could add to your portfolio.
I completely agree. And I agree on so many levels. So first, I have mentored people into the Salesforce space, and continue to do so. I'm actively working with a mentor right now, or mentee right now, and walking them through how do I go and how do I break into the Salesforce world essentially. And I see Trailhead, I see all of these learning materials. And I heard at one point the sum of all Salesforce training materials is greater than the combined work of Shakespeare if you add up all the pages in word count. Like, it is just unfathomable to sit down and actually learn everything about Salesforce, and people get very overwhelmed. And one of the best things to really draw out that practical experience is volunteering. And, kind of going back to you don't need to always build a mountain. I've had organizations contact me because I have been in this nonprofit space for so long. They're just looking for simple things like, hey, if we had this process builder stood up and working, it's going to allow us to do this, this, and this. Do you have somebody that can come in and take a look? Like, little things like that, and those little volunteer opportunities allow you to say, oh, I now can take my textbook learning and turn that into real practical experience. So a lot of those skills, and Salesforce isn't the only one. I know I gave a Salesforce specific example there, but adding that nonprofit, those nonprofit skills to your resume does nothing but help you, and does nothing but help you not only from a visibility standpoint, and you're building your resume long term, or building up your consultancy long term, and building up your list of connections, but it also helps on your just technical skills. You having more exposure to these technologies, having more practical hands-on experience about, hey, I know how this works now because I've seen it in 15 different ways, at all these different organizations. That helps you be a true consultant, and you can then say, okay, these are options that we have on the table, and I know how to practically implement it as well. It's a very powerful skill set and a very powerful message to bring, to a consultancy, to an individual's resume, whatever it may be.
I really like that. I like the I like I know that the conversation and the specific sprint has been more or less not really geared towards Salesforce, but it has been Salesforce heavy. But I do like how you say that it's not strictly Salesforce. It's not the main driver here. That being said, though, I am curious. What qualities do you think, if we could get specific on Salesforce here just for a minute,
Yeah.
with the Salesforce technology, what qualities does that have that can especially make that platform useful during not only this crisis, but how it's affecting the economy and how it can be useful in the midst of an economic downturn? Just speaking for a minute specifically to Salesforce.
Absolutely. I think Salesforce has done a number of things specifically for nonprofits, that make it a really attractive path to go for a lot of small nonprofits, especially. First off, they were the first to implement the 1-1-1 model, where 1% of their employees' time, 1% of their revenue, and 1% of, I believe it's their licenses, is the final one. And we can look up the 1-1-1 as far as it applies to Salesforce. But they were the first to implement that. And Mark Benioff has, done a fantastic job really sticking to, putting nonprofits front and center on the platform from the very beginning. So he really recognized that, hey, these community organizations are important. This is an important initiative, and we want to make sure that we're not just building technology just to make money. I think we see a lot of technology companies, especially in the past, that have done that, that we're really doing this, and still thinking about what is the impact to local communities. As we broaden that out and we start to look at the actual technology that they've built. I'll speak to my current role at the NRDC. And one of the things that we're seeing across the country, even right now, is just I just got stay-at-home orders this morning at 8 a.m. And I know that they're going across the country. And one of the first initiatives and one of the first things we looked at was saying, are we mobile ready? Now that people are working from their home, if they don't have their laptop that they brought home, are they able to work from their phone? And even something as simple as saying this technology doesn't have to have a desktop connection where you're logged in, that you're able to, access full featured pages right from your phone with minimal configuration on the admin side. That's something that, again, it may not sound like magic in today's world, sitting here in 2020, but not every platform does that. There's so many platforms that are not mobile ready, are very difficult to stand up. And as you start to think of the use cases that surround that, again, we can go back to the e-commerce model before, right? Like having your whole CRM there, so all your constituents are there, so all the people you serve are right inside of Salesforce. You have their name, address, and phone number. And again, say it's a very small food bank. You know where to deliver that food then, what preferences they have, what allergies can all be set up there. Like these are very simple apps to create that any admin that spent even a few years working on Salesforce could stand up in probably a weekend, do a very simple model, go on, train that organization and have them mobile ready right away, have them secure right away, and have everything right at their fingertips. So, it's all those small transformations that Salesforce makes very simple. So that simple declarative admin platform that they've built really allows just all of these really fantastic things to happen. Where if we wind the clock back 10 or even 20, 20 years, especially, but if we go back 10 years, a lot of this was not available. So we really start to think, pro technology and what can technology do to enable us in this time, the combinations are vast. I've been working with my partner in her organization, and she's a professional ballet teacher and working here in the Milwaukee community and working with them to start to look at, hey, can we do video lessons during this time? We can, no longer congregate to have everybody in the same place to do a class. Can we start to do Zoom classes at home? Again, we don't need to always think, I know this was supposed to be a Salesforce specific answer, but,
Oh, no.
again, using that toolkit, but yeah, Salesforce in specific, just it has a lot of options. And just because it makes it so easy to do a lot of these things and because the community is so vast, it's very easy to deploy these things at large scale very quickly.
Okay, so I think that you did a fabulous job convincing people that have skill sets to donate them to this nonprofit world and during this time, and they'll benefit personally and professionally. Can you talk a little bit about if you are representing a nonprofit or you have a friend, or like in my case, I love how you talked about the Houston Food Bank so much, us being here and witnessing everything they've been through over the years. I myself, having also come from a nonprofit world for a while, have friends and reached out to them. And now I believe the CMO of a Jewish community center in Houston, a very large center that just upgraded Salesforce, is desperately seeking help. So who would you look for to try to find these matches, and what kind of effort, how should they try to connect with you guys?
Absolutely. So I'll answer that in two parts. So I'll answer, how we're dealing with that inside of the community that we're building right now, and some of the things that we're thinking through, but also how an individual can do that. So on the community that we're putting together right now, and again, we're building this so that we can do sprints around these things, so we can congregate some of the best minds in Salesforce around very difficult issues. So we're really reaching out to our user group leaders within here. So Salesforce has built for years these community user groups, and they range from like admin user groups, nonprofit user groups, developer user groups. They're all over the entire world and geographically placed in communities, and they have their feet on the ground. So we're really looking to say, user group leaders, what organizations do you know that needs critical help today? Because again, food banks is where my passion is, but this crisis is touching so many organizations. I've also worked with homeless shelters. I've worked with different social services organizations, and there's going to be healthcare organizations that are impacted by this that my expertise does not lie in. But we already have people starting to focus there as well, and just making sure that we're looking at the broad scope of issues and then escalating those difficult issues and then putting them into a sprint format for our community. So really tapping our user group leaders on the shoulder and saying, hey, who do you know that needs difficult issues solved? Let's move those up to the hub. But on an individual level, it's really just turning your eyes back to the community. And there's a lot of things that can be posted online within local communities, but it's going to vary. Sometimes it's just reaching out to your network and saying, hey, do you know anybody that needs help at XYZ organization? So you're based in Houston. It's not just the Houston Food Bank that's going to need help. There's many, many organizations within Houston that are going to serve the local community. It could even be something you're passionate about. So I was talking with one of my old colleagues the other day who has spent most of her career working in the same vertical, so the same nonprofit vertical. And she's very passionate about animals and very concerned about the impact that COVID-19 is going to have on placement of animals into homes. So, working with organizations like ASPCA or your local shelter to say, hey, is there something that we could help out with? I know this is a crisis time. Again, look to do it pro bono if you can. I just urge people, hey, give back at this time. Think of what we can do to impact, but turn your focus to what you're passionate about as well. And give your nights, give your weekends. We're all in isolation and we're going to run out of things to do. We're going to clear out our Netflix queues very soon. Instead of just, watching the next thing that comes on, say, hey, what can I do? Reach out and just offer that help and just ask. Just be present for these organizations because they need help.
All right. Well, Tyler, it has been a pleasure talking to you. The passion is definitely contagious here with the COVID-19 sprint. And I had one last question for you to kind of summarize overall generally. In this massive call to arms and for the plan of action and for the initiative that we are calling the Salesforce community and really the technology community in general, what is the biggest takeaway that you want our listeners to receive from the message that you conveyed today?
I'm going to give two takeaways real quick, and I know that's cheating. So the first takeaway is that this does not have to be complicated, and you have the skills already. Again, I think a lot of times us technology workers really take for granted how easy things are to us and how difficult and magical things may seem to people that aren't familiar and aren't working on these technology platforms on a day-to-day basis. So sometimes it's as easy as setting up a free Slack channel and spending some time, teaching people how to use Slack so that they can continue to chat while they're at home. Keeping organizations going, especially organizations that are also under these stay-at-home orders, are going to be critically important, and just making sure that they have that ability to communicate with each other. So don't shoot for the moon all the time, and just make sure that you turn that focus outward. So and really turning that focus outwards is that second side of it. So don't overcomplicate things and reach out to your community. So you can join us. Come join us at techworkertaskforce.org. I know it's a long URL, but techworker, not plural, taskforce.org. There's a link to our Slack group. You can come join and see how we're operationalizing and how we'll tackle the big issues, but don't let joining be a barrier to just turn around in this time. So there's going to be a lot of need as we go through the next weeks and months, especially not even looking at just the virus, but looking at the market crash as well. The first thing that gets hit is the nonprofit funding. So making sure that these organizations that do fill those critical infrastructure needs within our society are filled. A lot of things, again, can be filled by those simple, easy gaps. So just take those nights, take those weekends, turn the focus out to your community, and mass action is what's going to need to be done here. And that's all I would have to say.
All right, Tyler. Well, hey, I will say this on behalf of Brooke and myself and all of SmartBridge. It has been a pleasure talking with you and just hearing about the COVID-19 sprint that you are initiating. Again, we are actually all speaking remote due to the global crisis, and we hope our listeners are staying safe and staying as engaged as possible and as unaffected as possible during the crisis. So again, this was Tyler Colby, along with Brooke and myself. Thank you for joining us and listening to another episode of the Transform IT podcast. If you did like what you hear, give us a like and share wherever you found us. And if you want more information on our podcast or more episodes like this, visit smartbridge.com/podcast. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.